When Seni was a child, my father often left her for long intervals with my grandmother, Gatita, whom she called Mama Piri. One family legend tells of a 9-year-old Seni answering the door during the pouring rain. A man with soaked hat and coat stood at the doorway. Seni yelled out, Mama Piri, there's a strange man at the door. Don't worry, mija, Gatita said. He's only your father. Seni lived in several rentals in Watts until she found a 2-story on 111th Street near a block of factories. The place later got razed to build Locke High School. I'd stayed there a couple of summers sleeping in a cobweb-infested attic with exposed 2x4 studs. Rats and cockroaches roamed freely in that house. Huge rats, huge cockroaches. Seni would place a chair at the bottom of the attic steps, and she convinced me it would ward off the creatures. I believed it until one night I noticed the chair was gone. I ran down to tell Seni, but she yelled back in Spanish, Go back to bed. That chair couldn't keep nothing away, and only a fool would believe it could. I was devastated. Seni was my father's daughter from one of his earlier relationships. Her mother died giving birth to her. My father was handsome and athletic as a young man. He was the pole vaulting champion of one of the schools he attended. But his looks apparently got him into a lot of trouble. His father, Cristobal, then a general in the Mexican army, once disowned him when Dad fell for a woman and neglected his studies in medical school. Dad quit school to be with the woman, who would later become Seni's mother. I also had 2 older half-brothers, Alberto and Mario, who lived in Mexico. Another half-sister, Lisa, died as an infant after she accidentally ate some chicharrones my father was forced to sell on cobblestone streets in Mexico City after his father cut him off. My mother kept a sepia-colored black and white death photo of Lisa in a white lace baptism dress, looking like a doll, looking asleep, so peaceful as he lay in a tiny wood coffin. Our first exposure in America stays with me like a foul odor. It seemed a strange world, most of it spiteful to us, spitting and stepping on us, coughing us up, us immigrants, as if we were phlegm stuck in the collective throat of this country. My father was mostly out of work. When he did have a job, it was in construction, and factories such as Sinclair Paints or Standard Brands dog food, or pushing doorbells selling insurance, Bibles, or pots and pans. My mother found work cleaning homes or in the garment industry. She knew the corner markets were ripping her off, but she could only speak with her hands and in a choppy English. Once my mother gathered up the children and we walked to Will Rogers Park. There were people everywhere. Mama looked around for a place we could rest. She spotted an empty spot on a park bench. But as soon as she sat down, an American woman with 3 kids of her own came by. Hey, get out of there. That's our seat. My mother understood, but didn't know how to answer back in English. So she tried in Spanish. Look, Spick, you can't sit there, the American woman yelled. You don't belong here, understand? This is not your country. Mama quietly got her things and walked away. But I knew frustration and anger bristled within her because she was unable to talk, and when she did, no one would listen. We never stopped crossing borders. The Rio Grande, or Rio Bravo, which is what the Mexicans call it, given the name a power Rio Grande just doesn't have, was only the first of countless barriers set in our path. We kept jumping hurdles, kept breaking from the constraints, kept evading the border guards of every new trek. It was a metaphor to fill our lives, that river, that first crossing, the mother of all crossings. The Alley River, for example, became a new barrier, keeping the Mexicans in their neighborhoods over on the vast east side of the city for years, except for forays downtown. Schools provided other restrictions. Don't speak Spanish. Don't be Mexican. You don't belong. Railroad tracks divided us from communities where white people lived, such as Southgate and Linwood across from Watts. We were invisible people in a city which thrived on glitter, big screens, and big names. But this glamour contained none of our names, none of our faces. The refrain, "This is not your country," echoed for a lifetime. Although we moved around the Watts area, the house on 105th Street near McKinley Avenue held my earliest memories, my earliest fears and questions. It was a small matchbox of a place. Next to it stood a tiny garage with holes through the walls and an unpainted barn-like quality. The weather battered it into a leaning shed. The backyard was a jungle. Vegetation appeared to grow down from the sky. There were banana trees, huge sperm weeds, named that because they stunk like semen when you cut them, foxtails and yellowed grass. An avocado tree grew in the middle of the yard, and its roots covered every bit of ground, tearing up cement walks while its branches scraped the bedroom windows. A sway of clothes on some lines filled the little bit of grassy area just behind the house. My brother and I played often in our jungle, even pretending to be Tarzan. Rano mastered the Tarzan yell from the movies. The problem, however, was I usually ended up being the monkey who got thrown off the trees. In fact, I remember my brother as the most dangerous person alive. He seemed to be racked with a scream which never let out. His face was dark with meanness, what my mother called maldad. He also took delight in seeing me writhe in pain, cry, or cower, vulnerable to his own inflated sense of power. This hunger for cruelty included his ability to take my mom's most wicked whippings without crying or wincing. He'd just sit there and stare at a wall, forcing Mama to resort to other implements of pain. But Rano would not show any emotion. Yet, in the streets, neighborhood kids often chased Rano from play or jumped him. Many times he came home mangled, his face swollen. Once, somebody threw a rock at him which cut a gash across his forehead, leaving a scar Rano has to this day. Another time, a neighbor's kid smashed a metal bucket over Rano's head, slicing the skin over his skull and creating a horrifying scene with blood everywhere. My mother, in her broken English, could remedy few of the injustices, but she tried. When this one happened, she ran next door to confront that kid's mother. The woman had been sitting on her porch and saw everything. ¿Qué pasó aquí? Mama asked. I don't know what you want, the woman said. All I know is your boy picked up that bucket and hit himself over the head. That's all I know. In school, they placed Rano in classes with retarded children because he didn't speak much English. They even held him back a year in the second grade. For all this, Rano took his rage out on me. I recall hiding from him when he came around looking for a playmate. My mother actually forced me out of closets with a belt in her hand and made me play with him. One day, we were playing on the rooftop of our house. Grillo, come over here, he said from the roof's edge. Man, look at this on the ground. I should have known better, but I leaned over to see. Rano then pushed me, and I struck the ground on my back with a loud thump and lost my breath, laying deathly still in suffocating agony until I slowly gained it back. Another time, he made me the Indian to his cowboy, tossed a rope around my neck and pulled me around the yard. He stopped barely before it choked the life out of me. I had rope burns around my neck for a week. His abuse even prompted neighborhood kids to get in on it. One older boy used to see how Rano tore into me. One day, he peered over the fence separating his yard from ours. Hey, little dude, yeah, you. Come over here a minute, he said. I got something to show you. This time I approached with caution. Little good that did me. I stepped into a loop of rope on the ground. He pulled on it and dragged me through the weeds and foxtails, up the splintery fence, and tied it down on his side. I hung upside down, kicking and yelling for what seemed like hours until somebody came and cut me down. The house on 105th Street stayed cold. We couldn't always pay the gas or light bills. When we couldn't, we used candles. We cleaned up the dishes and the table where we ate without any light, whispering, because that's what people do in the dark. We took baths in cold water, and I remember wanting to run out of the bathroom as my mother murmured a shiver of words to comfort me. Así es, así será, she explained as she dunked me into the frigid bath. One night, my parents decided to take us to a restaurant since we had no heat to cook anything with. We drove around for a while. On Avalon Boulevard, we found one of those all-night ham, eggs, and coffee places. As we pulled up, I curled up in the seat. No, I don't want to go in, I yelled. And why not, my mother demanded. Por el amor de Dios, aren't you hungry? I pointed a finger to a sign on the door. It read, Come in, cold inside. Christmases came with barely a whimper. Once, my parents bought a fake aluminum tree, placed some presents beneath it, and woke us up early to open them up. Most of the wrappings, though, had been haphazardly put together because Rano had sneaked into the living room in the middle of the night and tore them open to take a peek. The presents came from a church group which gave out gifts for the poor. It was our first Christmas. That day, I broke the plastic submarine toy gun and metal car I received. I don't know why. I suppose in my mind it didn't seem right to have things that were in working order unspent. My mother worked on and off, primarily as a costurera, or cleaning homes, or taking care of other people's children. We sometimes went with her to the houses she cleaned. They were nice American white people homes. I remember one had a swimming pool, a fireplace, and a thing called rugs. As Mama swept and scrubbed and vacuumed, we played in the corner, my sisters and I, afraid to touch anything. The odor of these houses was different, full of fragrances sweet and nauseating. On 105th Street, the smells were of fried lard, of beans and car fumes, of factory smoke and homemade brew out of backyard stills. There were chicken smells and goat smells and grassless yards filled with engine parts and wire and wood planks cracked and sprinkled with rusty nails. These were the familiar aromas, the funky earth, animal, and mechanical smells which were absent from the homes my mother cleaned. Mama always seemed to be sick. For one thing, she was overweight and suffered from a form of diabetes. She had thyroid problems, bad nerves, and high blood pressure. She was still young then in Watts, in her 30s, but she had all these ailments. She didn't even have teeth. They rotted away many years before. This made her look much older until later when she finally obtained false ones. Despite this, she worked all the time, chased after my brother with a belt or a board, and held up the family when almost everything else came apart. Heavy blue veins streak across my mother's legs, some of them bunched up into dark lumps at her ankles. Mama periodically bleeds them to relieve the pain. She carefully cuts the engorged veins with a razor and drains them into a porcelain-like metal pail called a tina. I'm small, and all I remember are dreams of blood. Me drowning in a Red Sea, blood on sheets on the walls, splashing against the white pail in streams out of my mother's ankle. But they aren't dreams. It is Mama bleeding into day, into night, bleeding a birth of memory, my mother, my blood, by the side of the bed, me on the covers, and her slicing into a black vein and filling the pail into some dark, forbidden, red nightmare, which never stops coming, never stops pouring, this memory of Mama and blood and Watts. One day, my mother asked Ronald and me to go to the grocery store. We decided to go across the railroad tracks into Southgate. In those days, Southgate was an Anglo neighborhood, filled with the families of workers from the auto plant and other nearby industry. Like Linwood or Huntington Park, it was forbidden territory for the people of Watts. My brother insisted we go. I don't know what possessed him, but then I never did. It was useless to argue. He'd force me anyway. He was 9 then, I was 6. So without ceremony, we started over the tracks, climbing over discarded market carts and tore up sofas across Alameda Street into Southgate, all white, all American. We entered the first small corner grocery store we found. Everything was cool at first. We bought some bread, milk, soup, cans, and candy. We each walked out with a bag filled with food. We barely got a few feet, though, when 5 teenagers on bikes approached. We tried not to pay attention and proceeded to our side of the tracks, but the youths pulled up in front of us. While 2 of them stood nearby on their bikes, 3 of them jumped off theirs and walked over to us. "What do we got here?" one of the boys said. "Spicks to order, maybe with some beans." He pushed me to the ground. The groceries splattered onto the asphalt. I felt melted gum and chips of broken beer bottle on my lips and cheek. Then somebody picked me up and held me, while the others seized my brother, tossed his groceries out, and pounded on him. They punched him in the face, in the stomach, then his face again, cutting his lip, causing him to vomit. I remember the shrill, maddening laughter of one of the kids on a bike, this laughing like a raven's wail, a harsh wind's shriek, a laugh that I would hear in countless beatings thereafter. I watched the others take turns on my brother, this terror of a brother, and he doubled over, had blood and spew on his shirt and tears down his face. I wanted to do something, but they held me, and I just looked on as every strike against Ronald opened me up inside. They finally let my brother go, and he slid to the ground, like a rotten banana squeezed out of its peeling. They threw us back over the tracks. In the sunset, I could see the watchtowers, shimmers of 70,000 pieces of broken bottles, seashells, ceramic and metal on spiraling points puncturing the heavens, which reflected back the rays of a falling sun. My brother and I then picked ourselves up, saw the teenagers take off, still laughing, still talking about those stupid greasers who dared to cross over to Southgate. Up until then, my brother had never shown any emotion to me other than disdain. He had never asked me anything, unless it was a demand, an expectation, an obligation to be his throwaway boy doll. But for this once, he looked at me. Tears welled in his eyes. Blood streamed from several cuts, lips and cheeks swollen. "Swear! You got to swear. You'll never tell anybody how I cried," he said. I suppose I did promise. It was his one last thing to hang on to, his rep as someone who could take a belt whipping, who could take a beating in the neighborhood and still go back risking more. It was this pathetic plea from the pavement I remember. I must have promised. It was a warm September day when my mother pulled me out of bed, handed me a pair of pants and a shirt, a piece of burnt toast, and dragged me by the arm toward 109th Street School. We approached a huge, dusty brick building with the school's name carved in ancient English lettering across the entrance. Mama hauled me up a row of steps and through two large doors. First day of school. I was 6 years old, never having gone to kindergarten because Mama wanted me to wait until La Pata became old enough to enter school. Mama filled out some papers. A school monitor directed us to a classroom where Mama dropped me off and left to join some parents who gathered in the main hall. The first day of school said a lot about my scholastic life to come. I was taken to a teacher who didn't know what to do with me. She complained about not having any room, about kids who didn't even speak the language, and how was she supposed to teach anything under these conditions? Although I didn't speak English, I understood a large part of what she was saying. I knew I wasn't wanted. She put me in an old creaky chair near the door. As soon as I could, I sneaked out to find my mother. I found Ronald's class with the mentally disabled children instead and decided to stay there for a while. Actually, it was fun. They treated me like I was everyone's little brother. But the teacher finally told a student to take me to the main hall. After some more paperwork, I was taken to another class. This time, the teacher appeared nicer, but distracted. She got the word about my language problem. "Okay, why don't you sit here in the back of the class," he said. "Play with some blocks until we figure out how to get you more involved." It took her most of that year to figure this out. I just stayed in the back of the class building blocks. It got so every morning I would put my lunch and coat away and walk to my corner where I stayed the whole day long. It forced me to be more withdrawn. It got so bad I didn't even tell anybody when I had to go to the bathroom. I did it in my pants. Soon I stunk back there in the corner, and the rest of the kids screamed out a chorus of "P.U.," resulting in my being sent to the office or back home. In those days, there was no way to integrate the non-English speaking children, so they just made it a crime to speak anything but English. If a Spanish word sneaked out in the playground, kids were often sent to the office to get swatted or to get detention. Teachers complained that maybe the children were saying bad things about them. An assumption of guilt was enough to get one punished. A day came when I finally built up the courage to tell the teacher I had to go to the bathroom. I didn't quite say all the words, but she got the message and promptly excused me so I didn't do it while I was trying to explain. I ran to the bathroom and peed and felt good about not having that wetness trickle down my pants leg. But suddenly several bells went on and off. I hesitantly stepped out of the bathroom and saw throngs of children leave their classes. I had no idea what was happening. I went to my classroom and it stood empty. I looked into other classrooms and found nothing. Nobody. I didn't know what to do. I really thought everyone had gone home. I didn't bother to look at the playground where the whole school had been assembled for the fire drill. I just went home. It got to be a regular thing there for a while, me coming home early until I learned the ins and outs of school life. Not speaking well makes for such embarrassing moments. I hardly asked questions. I just didn't want to be misunderstood. Many Spanish-speaking kids mangled things up. They would say things like, "where the deer and cantaloupe roam," instead of "where the deer and antelope roam." That's the way it was with me. I mixed up all the words, screwed up all the songs.